"Get that fat girl into the pigpen right now." The stepfather roared across the yard. The miners burst into laughter, sharp and cruel. One of them raised a dirty roll of bills and waved it in the air, saying he was paying for her and wanted her brought out like livestock. Ellie stumbled as they shoved her forward. The wooden plank tore her dress. Mud splashed her face, and the stink of waste filled her lungs. Her hands shook, but her voice did not. She told them she was not something that could be sold. The door slammed shut. Laughter followed, heavy and drunk, grinding what little pride she had left into the dirt. That night, Ellie made her choice. She would run. She would not live one more sunrise as a thing that could be traded between men. She waited until the yard fell quiet, until boots stopped moving, until the lantern by the barn dimmed. Ellie pressed her back against the cold wood and listened. A mule snorted somewhere in the dark. The wind slid thin and sharp across the fields. Her heart beat so loudly she feared it would give her away. She pulled her torn dress close around her body. It was the best one she owned, saved for a day that was supposed to mean hope. Now it clung tight and wrong, but beneath the shame, something steadier burned, a small flame that refused to go out. When the back door of the house slammed, she ran. She slipped through the fence and into the open land beyond. Dry weeds cut at her legs as she crossed the pasture. The moon was pale but bright enough to show the shape of the road and the low roof of the station in the distance. With every step she whispered to herself not to stop and not to look back. She reached the station before dawn and hid behind stacked crates, keeping to the shadows. Two men passed nearby, their voices clear in the still air. One spoke in frustration, saying the bride was gone, that the girl had run and would not be coming. He cursed the trouble it would bring. The other man, the stage driver, sighed and said he felt sorry for the rancher waiting on the other end, a man named Wyatt Callahan, a man who needed a wife so the bank would not take his land. Without a bride, the whole arrangement would fall apart before the sun rose. Ellie closed her eyes for a moment. Then she stepped forward into the weak morning light. She told the driver she had heard enough to understand the situation. She said the wedding had already failed, but it did not have to ruin two lives. She reached into her pocket and showed him the small pouch of coins she had saved over years of quiet endurance. She told him she knew he needed payment, and she would give it. Then she said the words that mattered. She knew the rancher needed a wife, and she needed food and a place to sleep. She would not stay for nothing. She could work the house. The driver studied her for a long moment, then nodded once and helped her onto the seat. Far down the road, Wyatt Callahan waited at the platform with his hat pulled low against the cold wind. In his coat pocket lay a picture of a woman with a soft smile and delicate features, already alive before the day had begun. He did not look hopeful. He only looked tired. When the wagon finally stopped and Ellie climbed down, he knew at once she was not the woman who had been promised. She met his eyes without lowering her head and told him the truth. The bride had fled. She was offering herself in her place. Wyatt stared at the empty road, then back at her. He exhaled slowly and told her to get in the wagon. Behind them, the station woke to morning. Ahead of them waited a marriage born of need, not dreams, rolling forward on wooden wheels into land that did not yet know what it was about to become. Wyatt did not ask her name on the ride to Silver Gulch. He drove with both hands steady on the reins and his eyes fixed on the road. Ellie sat beside him on the wagon seat, feeling every jolt of the wheels beneath her. The air between them stayed quiet and hard, like frost that had not yet melted. She knew this was not kindness. It was necessity, the same thing that had pushed her onto the road before dawn. The justice office stood near the edge of town, a narrow building with a single window and a door that creaked when it opened. Inside, the air smelled of dust and old paper. The justice looked up from his desk and asked for names. Wyatt gave his without hesitation. Ellie answered when prompted and kept her hands folded in her lap so they would not shake. The words came quickly after that. Vows read without warmth. A question asked. A quiet yes spoken by two people who barely knew each other. The stamp struck the paper once, loud in the small room. It was done. Outside, the clerk from the bank waited with a thin smile. He nodded when he saw the signed document and said the extension would stand for 18 months. Wyatt thanked him with a short nod and nothing more. Ellie watched the exchange and understood what she had agreed to. Time, shelter, work, nothing else promised. They climbed back onto the wagon and turned toward the open land beyond town. The road stretched long and empty. Wyatt did not look at her. Ellie did not try to fill the silence. She had learned long ago that words could cost more than they were worth. The sun climbed higher and warmed the dust beneath the wheels. Still, the space between them remained untouched. When the ranch finally came into view, Ellie drew a slow breath. The house stood alone against the wide valley, solid and worn, with a porch that wrapped around its front like a tired guard. Wyatt stopped the wagon and spoke at last. He told her there would be food and a bed. He told her she would work the house and keep to her side. He told her she would sleep in a separate room and that his door was not to be opened. Ellie nodded and said she understood. Inside, the rooms felt clean but empty. The walls held no laughter. Wyatt showed her a small room at the end of the hall and left her there. Ellie set her pouch on the bed and smoothed her dress. She listened to his boots fade away and realized the truth. This marriage had given her safety, not belonging. For now, that would have to be enough. Ellie learned the rhythm of the house quickly. She rose before dawn, lit the stove, and set about her work while the air was still cold. By the time Wyatt came in from the yard, breakfast waited on the table and coffee steamed quietly between them. He ate without comment. When he finished, he stood and left. Ellie listened to his boots fade down the porch steps and told herself this was the agreement. Food and shelter in exchange for work. Nothing else was owed. Most nights she saw him sitting outside. The same chair. The same view of the fields. A cigarette glowing between his fingers. A bottle resting close at hand. He stared into the dark as if expecting it to answer him. Ellie never joined him. She closed the door softly and returned to her small room, where the walls felt thinner than the night outside. The sickness came suddenly. She heard him stumble in the hall and then a heavy thud against the bed. His breathing turned uneven. Words spilled from him in broken fragments, thick with fear. Names. Apologies. Pleas meant for someone who was not there. Ellie stood outside his door, her hand hovering near the knob. She remembered his rule. Do not enter. She waited one breath, then another, before turning the handle. The room was hot and smelled of sweat and old grief. Wyatt lay tangled in the sheets, his face pale and damp. Ellie crossed to him and pressed a cool cloth to his forehead. He stirred and muttered again. She told him quietly that he was home and that he was safe. He did not seem to hear her. As she reached for water, her eyes caught on a shelf near the wall. Photographs stood there. A woman with kind eyes. A small child leaning against her shoulder. Below them lay toys worn smooth by careful hands. A doll rested among them, its dress faded with age. Ellie lifted it before she could stop herself. Wyatt woke with a sharp breath. His eyes fixed on the doll and his voice rose, sudden and harsh. Put that down. Ellie froze and set it back at once. I am sorry, she said. You were ill. I did not mean to intrude. He pushed himself upright and pointed toward the door. Get out. That room is not for you. She left without another word. The door closed behind her with a sound that echoed down the hall. The next morning, Wyatt did not come out. Ellie placed a tray of food outside his door. By evening, it had not been touched. She cleared it away and cooked supper anyway. When Wyatt finally appeared, they ate in silence. Afterward, he took the bottle and went back to the porch. Ellie washed the dishes and watched him through the window. The house settled into stillness again, heavier than before. She did not know the full shape of his past, but she knew it had not let him go. And now, it stood between them. The silence between them lasted for days. Wyatt spoke only when work required it. Ellie answered when spoken to and kept her thoughts to herself. She moved through the house with care, as if the walls might remember the raised voice. Each night, Wyatt returned to the porch with the bottle. Each night, Ellie closed her door and listened to the wind cross the valley. One evening the cold settled deeper than before. Ellie finished the dishes and stood for a moment in the kitchen. She poured water into the kettle and set it on the stove. When the coffee was ready, she filled 2 cups and carried them outside. Wyatt sat in his chair, the bottle near his boot, smoke curling from his cigarette. He looked up when she approached. Ellie held out one of the cups and spoke gently. "You are just getting over an illness. This might be better than what you are holding." He stared at the cup for a long moment, then took it. The bottle stayed where it was. He did not drink right away. When he did, it was a careful sip. "I should not have spoken to you like that," he said. His voice was rough. "That room is not meant for anyone else." Ellie nodded. "I understand. I should not have touched anything." They sat quietly, the fields stretching dark before them. Wyatt took another sip and spoke again. "The woman in those pictures was my wife. The child was our daughter. They died 4 years ago. Since then, this place has only been a shelter." Ellie kept her eyes forward. "I'm sorry," she said. "I did not plan to live this long," he admitted. "I stayed because the land stayed." Ellie wrapped her hands around her cup. "The people we lose are gone," she said softly. "But if they loved us, they would not want us to stop living. They would want us to stand up again." Wyatt exhaled. The cigarette burned low. "I do not know how," he said. "You start with what is in front of you," Ellie replied. "You still have 18 months to keep this place. That means you are not finished." He looked at her then, really looked. "If you do not have another place to go," he said, "you can stay here until you decide otherwise." Ellie smiled slightly. "I can stay as long as I choose," she said. Then she added, lighter, "with the condition that we keep the ranch." Wyatt let out a breath that might have been a laugh. The bottle stayed untouched. The coffee cooled between them as the night settled. For the first time, the space between them felt less rigid. Ellie's place at the ranch stopped feeling temporary. She no longer limited herself to the house. When work needed hands, she stepped in without being asked. She carried water, kept records, helped mend tools, and learned the rhythm of the barns. She asked questions when she did not know and listened when answers came. She never raised her voice. She never acted owed. The work spoke for her. The men noticed first. They noticed the meals came steady and warm. They noticed supplies stopped running short. They noticed the house felt easier to enter at the end of a long day. No one said much at first. Respect grew quietly, like something earned rather than given. Wyatt watched it happen without comment. He still rose early and worked until his hands ached. Each evening he took his chair on the porch. The cigarette remained. The night air remained. But the bottle did not return. In its place was a simple cup, warm against his palm. Coffee Ellie brewed before dusk. He drank it slowly, looking out across the land as if learning how to stay with his thoughts instead of fleeing them. Nothing was announced. Nothing was explained. The change stood on its own. At supper one night, the table was fuller than usual. Plates were passed. Someone laughed at a small remark. The sound lingered longer than it used to. An older ranch hand cleared his throat. He was not a man who spoke lightly. He looked down at his food, then up at Wyatt. "Boss, it has been a long time since I heard laughter at this table. You married a good wife. She's hard-working, kind, and her cooking is something special." The room went still. Ellie felt the heat rise to her face and kept her eyes on her plate. Wyatt set his fork down. He did not rush to answer. After a moment, he nodded once. It was enough. The meal continued, but something had settled into place. Trouble came the next day, riding in without warning. A man Ellie knew too well stepped through the gate. Her stepfather. His voice carried across the yard as he demanded she come home. He said she belonged to him. Old fear stirred, then steadied. Ellie stepped forward before anyone else could speak. She told the truth clearly. She said he sold her to miners. She said he took money and left her in the mud like an animal. She did not shout. She did not cry. The words landed where they needed to. The men gathered closer. Murmurs spread through the yard. Her stepfather laughed and reached for her arm. He did not finish the motion. Wyatt moved between them. His voice was calm and firm. "She is my wife," he said. "Anyone who touches her will answer to me. I swear to God he will not find his life easy." 6. The line held. The men stood behind Wyatt without being told. The stepfather saw what he could not break and turned away, his threats falling flat in the dust. When the yard finally cleared, Ellie stood where she was, steady and upright. Wyatt looked at her, not as a problem to manage, but as someone who had stood her ground. No words were needed then. The ranch returned to its work, quieter and stronger than before. The bank office smelled of paper and ink. Sunlight fell across the counter where signatures were placed with care. Wyatt stood beside Ellie as the clerk counted coins and checked the figures one last time. The debt was cleared. The papers were stamped and filed away. Nothing dramatic happened. No cheers, just the quiet certainty that the land would remain theirs. When they stepped back outside, Wyatt drew a slow breath, as if a weight he had carried for years had finally loosened. He looked at Ellie before turning toward the wagon. "I need to go somewhere," he said. "Will you come with me?" She nodded without asking where. They rode in silence for a time, the road narrowing as it climbed toward a low hill. Wyatt guided the wagon to a stop near two simple stones set close together. The place was kept clean, grass trimmed short, no flowers placed for show. Ellie understood without being told and stayed a step behind as he walked forward. Wyatt slowed his steps as they neared the stones. He did not look back, but he knew she was there. After a moment, he spoke, his voice low. "I have not brought anyone here since they were buried." Ellie stopped and waited. "If this is not a place you want to stand," he continued, "you do not have to." She answered without hesitation, "I want to be where you are." He nodded once and took another step forward. The air felt still, heavier than the land below. Wyatt paused again and drew a breath that seemed to settle deep in his chest. "For a long time," he said, "I thought if I kept this place quiet, I was keeping them safe." He looked down at the stones. "I did not understand that silence can also be a kind of running." Ellie listened, her hands folded, letting the words arrive without interrupting them. "She did not pull me here," Wyatt said softly, meaning Ellie without turning. "She walked beside me until I was ready." He swallowed and added, "I'm still afraid sometimes, but I'm not hiding anymore." The wind moved gently through the grass, brushing past them both. Ellie felt the weight of the moment settle, not as grief alone, but as something steadier, something finally shared. Wyatt stood before the stones and removed his hat. He did not speak at first. When he did, his voice was steady. He said he had lived in fear for too long. He said he had mistaken survival for living. He admitted he had closed himself off because he believed pain was the only thing waiting beyond that door. Then he spoke of Ellie. He said she had pulled him back into the present without force, that she had stayed without demanding, that she had reminded him how to stand again. He asked for their blessing, not to replace what was lost, but to carry it honestly into what remained. Ellie listened quietly. She did not feel like an intruder. She felt like someone trusted with the truth. When Wyatt finished, he placed his hat back on his head and turned to her. Nothing more needed to be said. They returned to the wagon and began the ride home. The road stretched long and familiar. As the day eased toward evening, the light softened and the land opened wide before them. Fields rolled gently under the sky. The air cooled. It was then that the sun began its slow descent, painting the valley in warm gold for the first time since Ellie had arrived. The wagon moved steadily forward, wheels creaking in an easy rhythm. Ellie glanced at Wyatt and smiled. 18 months as husband and wife, she said lightly. And this is when you finally confess. Wyatt let out a quiet breath that turned into a smile. He reached for her hand and held it, firm and sure. The sun dipped lower, touching the edge of the land before slipping away. The ranch waited ahead, solid and real. Together, they rode on as the light faded, and for once, neither of them felt the need to look back. Thank you for letting this story keep you company for a while. Stories travel far, and they always arrive at someone's quiet moment. If this one found you tonight, I would love to know where it met you. What were you doing? And what time is it where you are? Your words stay with me longer than you think.